One time I worked out right
Sorry.
before a wait, one time I worked out right before a podcast and then I was all sweaty and I was like, that was a terrible idea.
Yeah, I was just cooking and cleaning. So I went with my hair and then I went up and then I'm out of breath. Yeah, all right. So it's recording. We'll get started.
All right.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Unleashing Potentials podcast. So joining me today is Laura Nichols. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, you're welcome. Can you tell us where you're tuning in from?
Yes, I actually live in North Carolina, in the United States, and
Mm.
it's weird because it's June, but it's in the 60s, which is not typical for here.
Oh,
Sorry, I mean 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
oh. Yeah, we use Celsius. I don't know how
I know.
I don't know how to convert that, but is it cool or?
It's cool. Yeah, it's cool for the time of year for where I live.
Okay, I see. Here it's hot. I had to close my windows. Yeah, it's really warm. Yeah,
Mm.
I'm so excited that you're here in this interview on the podcast to share. Um, so tell us, who is Laura and what
Sure.
you?
Yeah. So, wow, who is Laura? Well, I am a mom. I have two boys, one teenager, one preteen. So that already tells you a lot about my life.
Yeah.
But I was a school counselor for 16 years, so I know kids very well. I love teenagers, but it's very different when they're your own.
Mhm,
Um, I actually left the school counseling field about a year ago due
mhm,
to pretty severe burnout and ended up thinking I was going to get my therapy license because there's such a massive need for therapy. And
mhm,
then just sort of doing a lot of research and sort of soul searching, have ended up opening my own life coaching business
mhm.
and just realizing that that was the fit and really the direction that was good for me. So it's been an adventure learning to work for myself. So yeah, I'm a life coach, I'm a mom, I'm a ex-school counselor, um, I'm a partner. Um, yeah, I guess those are all attributes of my life.
Mhm,
Uh, I really just I am. Like I am, I think is
mhm.
the best way to say it.
Yeah, I love that. Would you describe yourself as an introvert or an extrovert?
Oh, I am very much of an extrovert. I you know, I well, you know the definition of an introvert versus an extrovert, right? Like,
Yeah.
so as an extrovert, I will go to a gathering of people and come home and have so much energy. If I'm, you know, just kind of doing my own thing, it's good for me to have alone time. But if I'm alone too long, I lose a lot of energy. I really gain energy from being around other people. So I'm very much of an extrovert.
Oh, wow. I'm the opposite. Um,
It's
yeah, I dabble between both, but yeah, I love being alone. I get more energy. But yeah, the world needs both introvert and extrovert.
Yeah, you know what's really funny? Introverts are totally my people. All of the people who end up becoming like my core, the people that I love hanging out with are actually all introverts, which is really interesting. I mean, it's not that they don't love people because you can love people and be an introvert. It just means that they really need time to recharge after they've spent it with people. So, um, my people love people, but they also need time away from people to get that energy. So, I'll come home from like a networking event or something, and I'll come in and I'll be crazy and happy and loud. And, I think my girlfriend's like, whoa, okay, like, give me a minute.
Yeah, yeah. Or your kids introvert or extroverts?
No, that's a really great question. It's so hard to say just because developmentally, especially having a
Mm,
15-year-old, there's so much about their peers, but I don't think that necessarily informs whether they're an introvert or an extrovert.
mhm,
Um,
Mhm.
because they love being with their friends. Um, but they also love being alone. So it's hard to say yet what they are, you know?
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. So you are a transition coach. Can you tell us more of what you do as a transition coach?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was leaving school counseling and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I really was making a purposeful decision,
Mm,
what really felt true to me. And as I was thinking about therapy versus coaching and looking at the differences between the two, I actually talked to a lot of therapists who were becoming coaches and sort of their reasons why, and realized that I wish I had had a coach. So about, gosh, 5 years ago now, I actually realized I was gay and I came out. And
mm,
it was a really hard process, a very um, difficult. It took a lot of processing.
mm,
And I had therapists, but I wish I had had a coach because what I have now come to find out is that, you know, coaching is just holding space and asking really purposeful questions to allow people to see themselves in a way that maybe they haven't before.
mhm,
And I wish I had had that. So, as a transition coach, in a lot of ways, I just um, really want to be there as people are going through major transitions, whether it's coming out later in life like me, or changing careers like I also have done,
mhm,
or ending of a relationship, divorce or a long-term relationship, which I've also been there as well. And then also my people very much are teenagers as well. And I just think that's one big transition anyway,
mhm,
um, that I love to help them through. So the sort of when the things are muddy, when you're unsure where the light at the end of the tunnel is, where you're illy, or even when you're unsure about what needs to change,
mhm,
that's my jam, and that's what I love helping people with. Because the reality is that we all have the answers inside of us. We just really need someone to help us find the answers.
mhm,
So I view myself as a co-pilot, right? My clients are the pilots. I'm sitting next to them and I'm just holding the map for them, asking them where they want to go.
mhm,
And that's sort of the best description of coaching that I've kind of come up with at this point.
mhm. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Boy, this is going to be a delicious conversation because
Mm.
there's so much to unpack. And it happened to be Pride Month. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, for anyone who's listening, maybe they don't know what Pride Month is. I didn't know what it was until I came to Canada. Can you tell us what is it?
Yeah.
Mm,
So, gosh, Pride Month. So Pride Month, at the bare minimum of an explanation, is a month of celebration for LGBTQ individuals and their allies. A month to step into themselves and say, "This is who I am," and this is, and I'm good with it, and I'm happy to be, queer or gay or lesbian or bisexual, transgender, whatever.
mm,
Um, it's a month to be seen, you know, especially here in the States, there's a lot of stuff going on right now, a lot of legislation being introduced. There are hundreds of bills kind of taking us backwards in time, I think, as far as especially aimed at our transgender, family members.
mhm,
And so I think this year Pride Month is probably more important than any other time. But
mhm.
it comes originally along, there's a history of Pride Month, and I'm not sure if you know that. Do you know about the Stonewall riots?
No.
Okay. So, at one point in history, it was very much illegal to be gay, in the United States, or transgender, or, any one of our part of our alphabet mafia, LGBTQ. And there would be clubs where the members of LGBTQ society would, come to maybe sort of secret, almost like a speakeasy, but just for LGBTQ people.
Mhm,
And the cops would raid it. And at one point, people started standing up.
mm,
And I feel like a bad LGBTQ member because I can't tell you the name, but there was something called the Stonewall riots, and one African American transgender woman finally stood up and started, stood up to the police and started these riots. And so that's sort of the history of where Pride comes from. And then, of course, it's celebrating sort of all that we've come through as a group of people, through the AIDS pandemic, um, and now like all the legislation we're looking at. So, there's Pride festivals in most main cities, and it's even coming to like the smaller towns. I live in it's not totally rural, but there's rural towns next to me who are, having their first or second Pride celebrations, which is a pretty big deal.
Wow, that's incredible. It makes my heart so happy that there are those who are brave enough to step out, to say, this is who I am, this is what I believe, like it or not, I'm going to be me. That's
Yeah.
the most inspiring type of bravery to have. And I look up to people
Mm.
like that who does not back down, regardless of what society thinks. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think that's part of community too, right? Like one nice thing about Pride is you get to celebrate with your community.
Mhm.
And there's strength in numbers and being able to stand together as a family and say, hey, we're here and we love who we are and we're not going to change. This is not a choice that I'm making. This is just who I am.
Mhm.
And it's funny. So in my life, I've made a lot of pivots, and people are always saying things like, "Oh, you're so courageous," and I love to like point out the fact that like courage is not a fun emotion, right? Because
It-
really
it's
all
scary.
it is scary. You
Yeah.
are choosing to act in the face of fear. So
Yes.
even while you're afraid, you're choosing to act. So it seems
Mhm.
like this really cool thing to make these choices, but it courage is courage kind of sucks a little bit, you know? I
Mhm.
mean, the more you do it, the easier it gets, but
Yeah.
it's scary for sure to step out there.
Mhm. Do it afraid. That's one of
Yep.
my favorite line. Do it afraid. Do it afraid. Because I have crippling anxiety at times when I go out. Do it afraid. Do it afraid. And I always ask myself, what's the worst that can happen? Death. What's the other worst that can happen? Right? It's just having the mindset to overcome and to
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I love that you're saying that because today I was thinking about self-efficacy and like just how important that attribute is. I was
Mhm.
kind of I was doing some nerdy coaching studying, right? And
I love that.
yeah. Well, I'm working on my accreditation right now, so
Mhm.
um that's part of it. But I was looking at the fact that really when you're working with clients, one of the most important things that they can start to develop is self-efficacy and just the ability to know that you have what it takes to get something done, right? And so the more you step out when you're feeling anxious or when your anxiety level's super duper high
Yeah.
and do it, the next time it'll be a little bit easier, right? And the more you do it, the more you train your brain to say, "Hey, I got this. Like I can do hard things, right?" So I love that you said that. And anxiety is like one of those things where we want to run away, but the only way to get through it is to do the thing. And that
Mhm.
sucks, but it's true.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I tried that. It didn't work because everywhere you look, there's humans.
Yeah.
There's cars, there's the outside world that we all must take part in, right? It's working through those fears. And sometimes I find those fears, they do have certain strings or triggers attached to them. What are your
Okay, tell
thoughts?
me, what do you mean by that?
An example would be childhood trauma. Um, Another example, maybe someone's been in a car accident. Um, they were fine, nothing happened, but they fear getting into cars or crossing the road because of cars.
So what you're saying is something has happened that then has now increased this anxiety that they may
Yeah,
not have had before.
yes,
I
yes.
mean, 100%. I have a perfect example of that. I I've been going to the beach since I was a little kid, and I didn't grow up in North Carolina. I actually grew up in Virginia, but I would come to North Carolina beaches for vacation. And then when I moved here, my kids have been going since they were babies to the beach. And I would always teach them, no matter what, the ocean's always in charge. Like you just don't know. You have to be respectful of the water. And the last time we went to the beach after all these years, I'm 43 now, I actually almost drowned due to undertow. And it was a really, really scary situation.
Mm,
And so my love for the beach completely now has this anxiety attached to it that it's never had before.
mhm.
Um, and you know, it sucks to have to like kind of work through that when it was something you maybe never dealt with before.
Yeah,
Um, and it's really hard to like now have an anxiety that just kind of cropped up out of not nowhere, because clearly I know where it's coming from.
yeah.
But I never had to deal with it before, and it's
Mhm,
definitely difficult.
mhm. Yeah, that's a great example, and I'm glad you're okay. I personally don't like water. I drink it, I use it, but no, I'm more of a land person.
Yeah, and I love water, and so it's sort of this fight on the inside. Although I will tell you, the best medicine was I just went to Greece, one of the Greek islands with some friends, and like we've been friends. We were celebrating our 25th anniversary of friendship,
Mhm,
and so we went to Zakynthos, and it's one of the islands on the Ionian Sea,
mhm.
and right by our house, you could walk in the water. There were absolutely no waves. It was completely still. And then you would walk in, and when you couldn't touch anymore, you still floated. Like you didn't have to do anything, and your head would stay above
Yeah.
the water. And I was joking. I was like, this is the perfect therapy that I could have imagined, right? To like get back in the water because I just had some anxiety that I had to work through. But like we said, you have to do the thing, even
Mhm,
when you're scared. It doesn't go away on its own.
mhm. Yeah.
Action through fear for sure.
Yes, yes, I agree. I know what LGBTQ stands for. Can you tell us what it means for those who don't know? Maybe someone's watching from a different country.
Yeah, sure. So, it's L is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and then queer, or sometimes people use it as questioning. But most accepted is typically queer at this point.
Mhm,
And so, a lesbian is a woman who identifies as a woman who is attracted to women. Gay typically refers to a man who identifies as a man and is attracted to men who identify as men.
mhm,
Bisexual is somebody who is attracted to men or women.
mhm.
And it's funny because pansexual is not in there yet, but eventually it will be. LGBT is transgender, somebody who identifies as um, a different gender than what they were labeled with at birth.
Okay.
And then Q is queer, so sort of like an umbrella term.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you for
Yeah,
explaining that. Um,
yeah. And there's so many other like there's, my latest job before I opened my business was as a middle school counselor.
mhm,
And there's just so many different labels now that, even the youth are using that I don't even necessarily know about.
mhm.
So, but those are sort of the current staples of the
Oh,
community.
okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. You also work with youth that are um, in the community or at school or how?
Yes, right. So when I was a school counselor, those babies tended to be mine, right? Because I
Mhm,
think that they could identify with me. And so they always came to me, even if they weren't my class of students. I was the sponsor for the DSA, which is the Gay Straight Alliance at our school.
mhm.
Um, and then I also work with the youth program in the city near where I live. So the LGBT Center of Raleigh, I work with their youth program.
Yeah.
Um, and it's really interesting because I thought I was kind of done working with kids because I have been doing it for so long.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm finding that a lot of my clients are actually teenagers. And so it must be some sort of energy I put out, but a lot of parents have been reaching out to me as a coach for their kids. and it made me realize like I miss them and I'm really, really glad to be working with them again.
Mhm.
Because they're just, teenagers are really special and we've all been there. We've all been through that stage. It's not the easiest. So, um, I thoroughly enjoy working with teenagers.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome that you're doing that because um, I feel that sometimes there isn't the proper or enough services for preteen or teenagers,
Hmm.
right? Even though all of us have been there. For me, it was terrifying, right? Hormones, period, and you know, bullying, and like, how do you talk to anybody about that, right? That's why what you're doing is important and needed, and I'm so happy that you're helping the
Mm.
next generation, really.
Yeah, I mean that's the truth, right? Eventually they're going to be taking care of us. So we, definitely want to support them now.
Mhm,
And they are an amazing, amazing generation.
mhm,
Um, they are very cool and their values are pretty amazing and they've taught us so much about bravery already.
mhm,
So yeah, 100%. I love working with teenagers and
mhm.
I at this point I see myself doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
I had to take a little bit of a break, I think, but I'm back.
That's good. I mean, some people runs the other way, right? Some of them you go towards them. That's inspiring to see and to know. Um, all right, so much to unpack. I'm so curious about this next section we're gonna cover about
Sure.
your faith. You described it as dismantled religious beliefs. Tell me
Yeah.
more.
Um, yeah, so growing up, I didn't really grow up going to church or anything. When I visited my grandmother, we did. Both of my grandparents' sides were Methodist. But it was nothing that I really subscribed to. But when I went into high school, I started hanging out with, kids who went to church and kids who were part of youth group. And I ended up starting to go to church and, became a Christian. Um, and it was great in a lot of ways because, as a teenager, things are very black and white. You need a little bit of structure to help sort of make sense of the world. But it also did a lot of damage to me. And when I say that, what I mean is the church that I was a part of was very conservative. Women did not have leadership positions. It was in the 90s when the purity culture was sort of like super hyper and a massive thing. There were daddy daughter dances and purity rings and um, you know, just all we were sort of spoon fed this idea that um, especially women or young women
Mhm,
sort of had to keep this image of purity to like be valuable, right? That's where our value came from. And I went to college and you know, I was very quickly swept up in an organization that was really conservative Christian, and I was training to be a missionary, and it was my life.
mhm,
Um, and then in between my junior year and senior year of college, I sort of something clicked for me, something changed, and I remember looking at my best friend who was not a Christian and thinking, whoa, like in my mind, she's going to hell. And I was like, wait, who the heck am I to like think that about somebody? Like that is not my place. And yet what I had been taught was, if people didn't believe in Jesus as their savior, the one and only way, didn't have a personal relationship, then they were going to hell.
mhm,
And it was kind of a quick like flip of a switch. Um, However, that really presented some, mental health issues. I spent the summer crying in a puddle on the floor of my, childhood home. I don't think my mom really knew what to do with me. And then I eventually went back to school for my senior year and I quit everything. I walked away from the Bible study that I led. I walked away from the Bible study I was in. I was on the leadership team of the organization. They were preparing me to be a missionary. Um, and my life was a little lonely for that year because I had really built up this life around this identity. And then you throw in, that's just sort of the religious part of it. Then you throw in the my relationship with God and like, what does this mean? Like, how could I have been so duped? Like, just a lot of, you know, a lot of feelings about that. So that was my first sort of major pivot in my life, and um have since sort of done several more.
You're not alone. I've pivoted so much, I don't even know when I'm pivoting or not pivoting.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe it's just life, right?
Oh, it's life. It's a roller coaster. Sometimes you get motion sickness, and sometimes you
Yeah.
don't. It's yo-yoed, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I don't think you're alone in how you feel about the church, whether it was back then or now. Maybe some things have changed, maybe they haven't, or they've been covered. You know what I mean? Like it's like covering a canvas um, to remove the original painting of it, if that makes sense. Doesn't mean the issue is gone. It's just a new manual of looking at it, right? Um,
Yeah, it's possible. And I know there's a lot of different types of churches too. And, there's a lot of different, but I just think the world is so much bigger than we allow ourselves to realize.
I agree. Yeah, this is a sticky topic, but I love sticky.
Me too. I'm down for it.
I like to go all the way and just go there because what happened is we fear what people may think. Oh, who may leave? I've had too many people leave and it feels normal, right? Because when we start to find who we are without who the community we're in thinks we should be, that's when the journey truly begins. And it's not for the faint of heart, that
Mm-mm.
I can say, right? That's when it truly begins. Um, I mean, I love all people, all religions. I don't really divide. Um, but I think people should be able to see what works for them and how it works, and have the freedom to do that and to choose.
Yeah, I agree. It reminds me a lot of Brene Brown in Braving the
Oh my gosh,
Wilderness,
I
right?
love her.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like we have this innate need to be liked, be part of community. But then when it starts not being authentic, when we start to figure out who we are and realize that these people that we're standing with or the community that we've been part of doesn't really match who we are anymore, then that's where that courage comes from, right? And the ability to have action through fear, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
brave the wilderness, as she would say.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, those are my people, the people who are willing to walk away for things that aren't true for them. I really, I I love I love people who can do that and who have done that and really stand up for who they are and who they grow into. Because we grow and we change as well.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's not easy. I've lost people along my way. I've lost a lot of people too.
Oh, I have too. And it's ridiculous, in a beautiful way. Maybe in the first phase of it, it hurt, right? It's like my heart is broken. I needed you, I need you. Um, and I think in those times when we shed those tears, they give us more strength to understand what we're crying for.
Mm,
And now I know exactly who that F I am. Um, I open the door for people, right? They can get up, they can leave. It doesn't bother me like it used to. Um, and it's building the resilience and the understanding, that not everyone is meant to stay,
mm.
right? Not everyone is meant to stay. Um,
Yeah, and we don't do a good job teaching kids that. I think when I was growing up, the big thing was like the BFF necklace where you split the heart and you give it
yeah,
to your best friend and then you know what I mean? And
yeah,
and the reality is exactly what you're saying. People are not necessarily meant to be in your life forever.
Mhm.
And that first true loss of people, yeah, you're right. Like that's brutal. Like my first serious loss of people, it took me out for, I would say, a solid 2 years,
Mhm.
you know. And it was really difficult, but you're right. You build that resiliency and you come to realize that people aren't necessarily meant to be in your life for your whole life. And
Mhm.
once you start to realize that, it does make it easier,
Mhm.
you know, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, it's taking off the mask, right? To say, hey, I'm taking it off. This is who I am. But back to, religion, I can say that I grew up in Haiti with different beliefs: Jehovah Witness, Christianity, voodoo. I don't know what else. I was traumatized by all of them. um,
That is quite a mix, by the way.
oh, I know. Yeah, yeah. And when people want to know, how did you have mental health issues? I'm like, how much time do you have to do? How much time do you have to do the math and the years and the days, right? Um, I had to figure it out by myself. It's like I
Mm,
was thrown into the sea. There were so many different fish in there, but which one was I going towards? And I did that by realizing what was right for me.
mm,
As I'm sitting here, I believe in God, heaven. I don't judge, criticize anybody for what they believe. I love people. I just need time away from them to, get my energy. But yeah, how, so the question I want to ask, I'm trying to think how to ask it. How do you bring what you believe into the lives of those you're serving?
oh, that's a great question.
I think
So
a lot of
so
power to put that together.
yeah, no, that's a really great question. And I think that it really speaks to people's views on what coaching is. So let me explain. The truth of the matter is coaching is kind of a terrible word for what life coaches do. And I'll explain why. Because life coaching in the purest form is really just a purposeful conversation with an agreed upon direction from A to B. And so I'm not going to pretend that I don't bring myself and my beliefs into my relationship with my clients because that would be really naive and ignorant to say, right? Um, but really, it is very client centered in the sense that what they see, how they feel, the veils that we're unveiling for them are the primary focus. Now, with that said, it is really important to understand what my values are, what my beliefs are, so that I do know if I'm bringing something in and it's, changing my perspective, because the reality is that's just how humans work. We can't come into a situation and see it without some sort of structure. So the key really is understanding where those, gosh, what would I call them? Like roadblocks might be for me as I come into a situation, if I do. Like for instance, just from a personal standpoint, it might be really difficult for me to work with someone who like hated LGBTQ people, right? And that would probably be a choice for me. Like I would like probably say that's it's not going to fit. I'm sure I can help you find another coach that would be able to work with you. Um, but for the most part, it really is so client centered that it's really very much more focused on them than anything else. In fact, my like one of my very first clients was like opposite of me in so many ways. And it like we have such a great relationship and it's been such a great growing process. Um, they've given as much to me as I've given to them, I think, through our client and coach relationship. But yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Oh, it does. Yeah. Yeah, it does. Which takes me to my next question. Tell me more of how you you're an expert in mental health and burnout. I was trying to separate the two questions, but I realized they come together.
Yeah. Wait, so what's the question?
Tell me more about burnout and mental health. What is your
Yeah.
input on it? Because I went through the burnout first and then mental health and then burnout. I keep going back and forth. It's not as
Yeah. Well, I think those two things go hand in hand, right? I mean,
mm,
you can't be burnt out without having it affect your mental health. I mean, that's just what burnout is.
yeah.
Um, for me personally, my experience was, I was a school counselor for 16 years and loved my job and I was really good at it. And COVID hit. And educators really sort of got a lot of the brunt of a lot of stuff that went on during COVID, trying to figure out how to all of a sudden educate in a completely different way than we were, and then being very criticized for it when it didn't go exactly how people thought it should go. And then even as the kids started coming back in, they're not okay. And I went from doing a mental health assessment to like maybe once every couple of weeks, maybe once a month to like almost daily. And, we're talking like 2 hours to the rest of the day trying to get the parent to come in, help them understand what the problem is, get them hooked up with resources. So, um, I know that educators, especially, there's a high rate of burnout right now. And so for me, what happened is I actually had a doctor's appointment the day after sort of this incident between these two groups of girls. And I spent all day mediating them and I thought we were going to be okay. Come to find out, one of the groups had followed one of the girls home, another group, and like beat her up. And it just broke my heart
Oh,
because I had
no.
spent like majority of my day with them.
Mhm,
And I know that it was their actions and I know it's not necessarily my responsibility, but it just was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back.
mhm.
And when I went to my doctor, I've been with her for years, and thank goodness for good doctors.
Yes.
She knew me well, and she was like, Laura, you need a break. You need to take a leave. You're not in a good place. And so I did.
Mhm.
I slept for an entire month. Besides my parenting duties, I slept.
Wow.
Like, and I didn't, and I, as a mental health professional, didn't even know how burned out I was, right?
Mhm,
And so that really opened my eyes to what burnout looks like and what it feels like.
mhm,
Um, you know, and I would have coworkers who would drive to work, sit in the parking lot, and like have to play music just to motivate themselves to get out of the car.
mhm,
Or you saw them in the hallway and they're just, the sparkle was gone, sort of just deadpan
mhm.
walking through the hallway. And, it's funny, I saw my coworkers uh, a couple months later and they were like, "Oh my gosh, Laura, you look amazing." And I was like, "That's so bizarre. I wonder why they think that." And I realized because I'm not stressed, which
Yeah.
is saying something because here I am working for myself, trying to build a business, never having done it before. Now, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of stress,
Mhm.
but the stress from the burnout that I was experiencing from my job was gone. And it
Yeah.
changed me. I was able to do things that I enjoyed, carve out time for myself, and get back to me.
Mhm.
And yeah, burnout is a big problem right now, for sure.
I believe you. I interviewed a teacher. Her episode
Mm,
was released this week. She talks about that as well. And she had to step back and, what does she want to do? And it's something she talks about. And lots of people face, they don't have to be healthcare professionals or other professions. I think it's the hustle society that we live in. Um, it's like our values are tied into our work when it should be
mm,
into our families and
mm,
hobbies and things that fill us up, our souls. Um, we look more at materialistic stuff versus the being. I'm not saying that working is bad. Please work, because we need to, but know when to step down. Know when your body's saying, "Nope, I've had enough." And in my case, I did not listen, and I'm paying for it.
mm,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Because I was going to school. I was a young mom. I had two jobs and classes, and I just crashed. And it didn't take too long for that to happen. Just crashed. and I've never
Yeah.
been the same person since,
Mm,
ever.
yeah.
A new woman every year, it feels.
Mm.
Yeah.
What what could you say? Do you see any upsides to that crash?
Oh, that crash is leading me to my destiny.
Mm,
um, because I before I had mental health issues, I didn't know what it was like to have mental health issues. Now I do. I'm like, OMG. Now I understand what that person was saying, or that counselor was saying, or therapist. Um, I was looking from the outside. Now I'm inside and able to do both.
mm,
Yeah, and you mentioned that you slept. I slept. That I made sure I ate and drank and slept. That's pretty much most of what I did, because I didn't sleep. And that's something I also talk about on the podcast. I'd love to have you and anyone who else who's interested to expand on the burnout topic and sleep and diet and all of it, because it impacts us so much.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it really does. And you know, it's really funny. I told you I went on vacation with my friends and like, come on, it was Greece. It was a beautiful vacation. I mean, I was gone for 2 weeks. It was the longest I've ever been away from my kids. And it was, you know, when you're with your people who are like home, you know, you just can be whoever. There's no masks, there's no filters. You just get to be.
Mhm.
Um, so it was an amazing vacation. It was the first vacation I think I've ever taken in my 43 years that I wasn't sad about coming home. I actually was really excited to come home to this life that I've been creating now. Um, and I think, oh, well, maybe I pinpointed something. Maybe I hit something, right? Like I'm actually creating a life that is fulfilling and has rest and has, you know, the things that fill me up. And the work that I'm doing is incredibly fulfilling. And that was a huge eye opener for me and sort of a big marker of excitement that I'm on the right path. And it just fuels me more to want to help other people to do the same,
Mhm.
you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. Um, give us a few signs that burnout is setting in, and a few
Yeah,
signs when it's chronic, when you're like, it's like red light flashing when you need to see someone or just to stop.
yeah. So burnout, I would say some of the stuff that I was talking about, whether you are sleeping not enough
Mhm.
or you're can't get out of bed or don't want to get out of bed.
Mhm.
When we're talking particularly about a profession, just it's now become normal that you don't want to go to your job, right?
Mhm.
Um, it's now become normal to bond with your coworkers over the trauma of the job. You know, that was something that we kind of did. And that's not a good place to be. Um, yeah, you're just not enjoying the activities that fill you up, right? Like for me, for instance, yoga fills my cup. I wasn't doing any yoga. I wasn't taking care of myself. I had no energy to do the activities that I loved. And on the weekends when I wasn't working, I didn't have the energy to do that either. I mean, my poor kids were just not getting a great mom. Let's just be honest, because I had nothing left to give them. You
Mhm.
know, and I was thinking about this recently because I'm doing a talk with like an end of the year talk with some teachers in a couple days, like
Mhm.
a speaking engagement. And I was thinking about the fact that, you know, we like to borrow our energy from other things. Like for instance, when teachers bring their work home, they're borrowing that time and energy away from their family. But
Yeah.
what I realize is you're not borrowing time. You can't borrow. You literally are stealing it. So if you are doing work when you have set that time aside to hang out with your family or to do yoga, whatever, you're not borrowing it because you can't put it back. You literally are stealing it. And so it's just when your life burnout a sign of burnout is when your life is completely out of balance and the time and energy that should be going to other things are solely on one side. And I think that's probably a marker for burnout in any part of your life if you're unbalanced, because balance is such a key to being healthy.
Mm,
So
mhm,
yeah, unbalance is a big one.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. And for some, it like it takes something big to happen to wake up and to
Yeah.
it does it did for me to wake up and to actually enjoy the little things. Um,
Mm,
an example, some people eat very fast. They don't really enjoy it. They do it because, they're hungry. Um, like you mentioned, going to work and you just go there just because, I don't know, you have to. You don't really want to. That's the case for lots of us. Um, let's talk a little bit about burnout amongst kids.
mm,
Yeah.
oof. All right. Feel like I could go on this topic for a minute.
Hmm.
Well, I do want to say one thing. You know what you said reminds me of something. They always say that you, a lot of times you don't make a change until the pain of not making it is bigger than the pain of making it, right? Because like whether you're scared or the change seems really big or until the pain is bigger, like let's say you have a health scare due to not making a change, right? Then that's when people finally decide to make the change. But why do we do that? Like, it
I
would be
don't
so much
know.
better if we could decide before that point, but a lot of times it takes something really big.
Mhm,
But yeah, burnout among kids, you know, I don't know if I would call sort of the crisis that we're in burnout necessarily with kids.
mhm,
I think what I think about for them is more like phone addiction, like social media addiction, their inability to focus due to, and honestly, all of us, but specifically teenagers with phones, the level of anxiety is so much higher for them now due to the like instantaneous nature of the world that we've created for them. You
mhm,
know, you text a kid and you're like, why didn't I hear back from you right away? Or, and when we were kids, like the phone rang, you didn't answer it, it went to voicemail, right? Like,
mhm,
and you played it on your old school voicemail. But anxiety is really high for them. Um, you know, they're just so used to having things instantaneous.
mhm,
And then they're also looking for the external validation from their peers or the world in some way. And so I think we're sort of in a little bit of a crisis when it comes to at least like preteen, honestly up to like 22 I would say,
mhm.
as far as that goes. And I say that because, excuse me,
No
and
worries.
I say that because when I was a school counselor the
Mhm,
last year, you know I was doing these mental health assessments almost daily of kids struggling, with depression. And there just aren't enough therapists to help at this point. There's such a massive need and our kids are not okay. So it may be burnout. I'm not sure, but I definitely know there's a mental health crisis going on.
yeah, you're right. Um, I talked about FOMO, fear of missing out, on the podcast. It's not
Mm.
only just kids who are impacted by it. We like to think it that way
Oh
because
yeah.
it makes us feel better. I fear of missing out sometimes, right? I think we all do. It's working with why do we feel that? And if we
Mm.
do, what are the causes, consequences? Right? My phone, I haven't used my phone for the last month or two. It's been the best 2 months of my existence because I don't
I
have to
love it.
listen to voicemails and pick up calls here and there. And it also attaches with anxiety. I'll tell you what used
Hmm.
to happen for me. When my phone rings, my heart skip beats, and I became not, the feeling you get before you faint. Like I don't know how to describe it, but that's what used to happen. Uh,
Lightheaded maybe.
yeah, yeah, just by the ringtone because it triggers me somehow. So it's on vibrate. I don't really have it up much, and I have working hours for my phone to be on, and Yeah, social media is a big one with kids. That's another big topic we could go on and on about.
I know. We could talk
Yeah,
about so many things.
yeah. Some parents they're like, don't tell me how to parent my child. I know what's best, but do we? Um,
Listen, my 15-year-old doesn't have a phone right now, and there's good reason for it, but it is hard to be that parent who's like, mm-mm, you
mhm,
know, when we tell my 11-year-old like, no, you can't play video games, like you're not gonna
mhm,
play and talk to your friends at the same time because you all are not kind when you do that.
mhm,
It's yeah, you're very much of the outcast of as a parent, you know. My kid's like, I'm the only kid, and I'm like, yeah, you probably are. Like that's probably an accurate statement. Like there's probably not a lot of kids your age that don't have a phone. I'm sorry, you know.
yeah,
And
you're,
that's when you really have to like put your foot down and you're like, I'm doing what I think is best.
mhm, you're.
But it is hard to parent against the grain for sure.
Oh, it feels like I'm fighting new storms every day. Uh,
Yeah, it's no joke.
hard because when do we know to separate the culture and um, who we are, and then it's all, it can become a beautiful mess very quick if we don't know what to separate from what.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And you think about the fact that they also have their own culture. So just by nature of being, however many years younger, 30 years younger than us, they have a completely different culture than we do.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so yeah, how do you tease out what's healthy versus not healthy? And but listen, every study that's coming out is talking about how unhealthy it is. So there's a lot of data to back up like why our kids should not have constant access to cell phones.
I mean, I feel bad for the people doing studies all the time because we don't always appreciate the information that comes out of the hard work to study.
Yeah,
Well, they're studying for us and obviously for their knowledge as well. We don't always receive their gifts, right? And
yeah.
yeah, not to make anyone feel guilty. We're human, we're all imperfect. We do things that we regret. It's a learning curve.
That's a really good point though.
Mm,
Like the like studies coming from like the scientific world into like kind of trickling down enough into popular culture for the masses to get it and read it and understand it. And
mm,
also then deal with the cognitive dissonance that comes when it doesn't agree with what
mm.
you think it should be saying, right?
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes I just keep my mouth shut because silence is an answer. Doesn't mean I necessarily disagree, but it's knowing when someone else's truth is not yours and appreciating their eagerness to have free will to choose.
That's a really beautiful and non-judgmental way to put that.
I love people. I don't care where they're from, what language they speak, what color they are. Um, I see beyond a vessel, which is what the body is. And
Yeah.
whenever I am quick to judge people, obviously I quote verses. I'm like, not right now, God, I'm busy. Right? I put myself in their shoes. I'm like, who am I to be
Mm,
judging these people? Am I better? Am I perfect? No. So no, judgment bar went down, right?
yeah.
Um, let's talk about mindset. Speaking of judgments.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of my I like to call it mindset editing, right? And it's sort of the um what am I thinking? Where are my thoughts leading me? And is this what I want to be actually thinking? Because I think what a lot of people don't realize is we're not our brains. Like our brains are just these beautiful computers that have been programmed for however many years we've been alive, and we can change that programming.
Mhm,
And that's another thing that we don't teach kids in school that we should be, I feel like,
mhm,
um, is that if thoughts aren't working for you, you can change them. Now, circumstances are one thing, right? Like the sky is blue. It just is, right? Um, right? So a circumstance would be like, I have, you know, $10 in my bank account. Okay, there's no judgment there. That's just like a factual thing, right? And
Mhm.
so if my thought about that is like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. What am I going to do? Then my feeling about that is going to be panic, right? Guilt, shame, whatever. And then the action from that is not probably not going to be great. Now, however, if the circumstances I have $10 in my bank account and the thought that I choose is, okay, let's do something about it, right? Then my feeling is going to be um, hopeful, action oriented, like ready to go. And then the action that follows that is going to be fruitful, right? Something that could actually come from it. And
Mhm.
I think it's so important to realize that, first of all, and then learn how to change your thoughts to practice to create essentially to create the life that you want to be living, you
Yeah.
know, and people don't realize that they have such power. And so I'm a huge proponent of that sort of work, you know, whether you call it CBT in therapy or, you know, you have a coach to work on that with. I think that that is massively powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I've talked to a lots of people recently, and all of them brought up mindset.
Mm,
All of them, and all of them have um, learned from negative and positive mindset, and they've also experienced the good and the bad fruit of mindset, which I find very intriguing because when someone knows what's bad for them and what's good, um, that's a lot of power as a mind.
so
Um,
much.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I've always sort of been not fully allergic to the word mind, but when you put the set to it, um, hmm, how can one create a healthy mindset without diminishing the work before even putting it in?
Mm,
Um, yeah, an example for me, I didn't always love myself or like myself, who I was, why I was the way I am. The mindset I had to create is that I'm stuck with me, whether I like it or
mm.
not. And I'm going to learn how I can work with my body, with my mind to love who I am and becoming.
Well, I love how you tell that story because I think the first thing that you notice in telling that is that you had to have an awareness of what your thoughts were,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So the first step is always just starting to listen without judgment, right? Like just listen to the voice that's coming out of your head.
Mhm.
Um, which starts with practice of just being in the present, right? Like I'm right here, right now, my brain's going, what is it saying? I'm not judging it. I'm just listening. It's saying like, I'm not good enough. I'm not whatever. Okay, that's interesting, brain, right? So the very first step is awareness of where your brain's going, right? And
Mhm.
I think the reason it's a mindset is because if you think about it, biologically speaking, you're talking about neural pathways that have been built into your brain. And that's, you know, basically the trail in the woods where the thought is traveling, right? And so it is kind of a mindset because the more you use that pathway, the deeper it gets entrenched.
Mhm.
And so to change the mindset, you do have to work on creating the new neural pathway. It's
Mhm.
like going into the woods and hacking down trees and having to create that new trail, right? So
Mhm.
the first thing is the awareness and the awareness that these thoughts aren't going to get you to where you want to be.
Mhm.
And you're like, where do I want to go? And what thought is going to create that? And so it's at the beginning, it's a big combination of non-judgmental awareness. And that's probably where the majority of your concentration starts at the beginning.
Mhm.
And then it transitions more to the practice. Okay, what thought is going to help me get to where I want to be? I've decided where I want to go, what thought's going to get me there.
Mhm.
And then it's like more of the practice. And the longer you do those two things together, the quicker you build that new neural pathway. And the other one might still be there, right? Like it's hard to undo those things we've been doing for years and years and years, but you now have the tools to like create that new one. And
Mhm.
I think that that is really the key in it.
Mhm.
It's and I think it's, you know, it sounds like to me one of your big values is non-judgment. And so this is like right up your alley, right?
Yeah.
is not just non-judgment for other people, but it's non-judgment for yourself and realizing I'm human. I've been put in this human form that has this human brain. And like in this lifetime, these are the constructs I've been given. Now, how do I make it work for me?
Yeah.
And yes, I'm really passionate about it. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, mindset. Interestingly enough, all of us use mindsets every day. An example, I have to put my mind into making supper today. If I don't, obviously I'll be distracted. It may not taste like I want it to taste. Mindset. If you're driving, you have to know where you're going. Why are you going there? Unless some people like to go for a trip, just driving, right? It's it's not only a start place; it's a destination. I find with mindset. Um, Obviously, not all of us have the map to get there. Some of us have to create our own map, and that's why I love mindset, how it comes in into that picture.
Yeah. I mean, and that really speaks to honestly kind of like the crux of being a human, right? Is having the ability to create. Like what a beautiful gift. The
Yeah.
ability to create new neural pathways in your brain, um, and new mindsets and new habits, you
Mhm.
know, it's a pretty cool gift.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Um,
Yeah.
what would you say to healthcare professionals or professionals who are experiencing burnout? And what would be one of the first steps they would need to take to start taking care of their mental health and overall well-being?
Yeah. Um, so I think there's a couple different things you can do. One is the awareness piece. Like, where am I at? What are things looking like for me in my job? A really truthful, non-judgmental picture.
Mhm.
Um, am I doing the activities I enjoy? Am I sleeping more or less than I need to be? Am I eating more or less than I need to be? Where am I the whole picture? And again, the key here is really non-judgment, right? Because
Mhm.
we're just taking an assessment. It's not for a grade, it's just how are things? It's like when you take your car in to get checked out, right? Like, how are things? And then the next step after you realize that is where are the problem areas, right? Like, where is it that this energy is being stolen is really the key.
Mhm.
Um, where is it being stolen from my family? Is it being typically it's being stolen from self-care? Typically when people are burned out, they're not really they're a lot of times giving everything to everybody else and not enough to themselves, right? Um,
Mhm.
and then if you sort of can dial down to that and think about your life and where you want to be, that's a good place to start to look at, can I get to B from A where I'm at? And how do I get there? Is the situation I'm in one that's going to lead me to B or is it not? And I think working with a coach in respect to being able to tease out some of that stuff is really helpful. I actually worked with a burnout coach when I was thinking that I was burned out. And she was able to allow me to see either my limiting beliefs or the fear in leaving the job that I didn't really realize I had and where that was coming from and sort of, the bigger picture behind burnout. Like what about me was attributing to this situation, right? I can't change the situation in respect to like what's going on there, who works there, all of that. But what about who I was attributing to this feeling of burnout and what could I change? And then ultimately I ultimately ended up resigning. Um, which I never saw myself doing. I thought that I would probably be a school counselor, the rest of my life. And I left without having a job, which I'm really conservative financially. And so that's a surprise. But I did enough work with her that I was able to see that, and my doctor, that I was able to see that where I'm at was not going to get me to where I wanted to go. And so I had to make a change.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think reaching out to a coach or a therapist or someone who can really give you that space to sift through that is really helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. To some, it's very hard to hear the word therapy. It's traumatizing to some.
Oh, sure, 100%.
Shouldn't be. I find that it's society that also adds to that trauma or fear. I used to feel that way personally. It's like, no, this is my private garbage. I want to protect it, or pain, or whatever it is that I used to feel that I'm burdening people when I tell them my
Mm,
problems, right? It's finding the balance. And guilt, I use guilt a lot because we all feel it every day. Maybe it's not as persistent as some days, but it's something that I find to be in every aspect of life. Every aspect. What are your thoughts?
well, you just gave me a whole lot of things to talk about. One, yeah, I mean, people, I know it's like the same thing as being a school counselor. People will be like, my school counselor said I could never go to college. Like, listen, there are times when people have bad relationships with therapists, right? And
Mhm,
they they don't mesh. Either it's a therapist who does something wrong, or their personalities just don't work, or the mode of therapy doesn't work. And so that's going to happen.
mhm,
But speaking to not wanting to share sort of your personal trash, one thing you have to realize about therapists and coaches is that ethically, it's our responsibility to hold that in confidence, right? So when you're talking to someone who is a trained therapist or a trained coach, um, we hold confidentiality incredibly tightly. It's a really important piece of our ethical standards. And
mhm,
it's one of the first things you're taught in school. Um, so if you don't have a great relationship with, the therapist you're working with or with the coach you're working with, there's so many others, right? Like if someone came to me, like I said earlier, and I didn't think that we were a good match, I wouldn't work with them. I would say,
mhm,
hey, let's find you somebody who might be a better fit,
mhm,
which any good coach or therapist is going to do.
mhm,
But it is a relationship and it's a connection between two people. And that's the most important thing. You have to feel comfortable.
yeah.
And I've fired therapists before. Like I had one that I didn't love, and so I moved on to somebody else. And that's okay because it's your money, it's your time. And if you're not getting out of it what want to be for the value,
Yeah.
then, move on.
Yeah. Um, I love that you knew what you wanted and you did it. Some of the many traps many of us are trapped in is that this person is not meeting my needs how I expect them to. Um, so I don't know what to do. Do I hurt them by saying, "Hey, I don't like you how you work,"
Mm.
or do we continue to lie to ourselves and wasting money and
And
not
time.
result money time, yeah, and not getting results? How can we all find that confidence and bravery to say, hey, I respect you, thank you for what you do, but it's not working? Not everyone can do that. We are capable of it, we don't do it often enough.
Yeah. I mean, which again goes back to coaching, right? Like if I had a client who was struggling with something like this, we would dig under the why. Where is this coming from? This is a limiting belief that you're telling yourself that you don't have the ability or the confidence to make these choices. Where else in your life are you not able to make choices and decisions for yourself?
Mhm,
Right? And also then ultimately not creating the life you want to live. So where are these roadblocks coming from? And let's dive in and take a look and excavate them,
mhm,
and a good coach or therapist will do that. Um, and hopefully that's probably already come up in if you're with a good therapist, that's probably already come up in therapy.
mhm.
Because, one thing is typically the fruit from a tree is going to be the same on the left side of the tree or the right side of the tree. So the same thing is probably happening somewhere else in your life where you're not staying up for yourself. You're not putting yourself first. You're not thinking that you have the right to, you know,
Mhm,
you don't have self-efficacy. So yeah, usually a little tiny piece of the picture is an indication of the bigger piece of it.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. That gives me an example I would like to give it. It doesn't necessarily have to do with what we just covered a minute ago. Um, my daughter in school, is like was saying, obviously she's not quite confident going into another grade, which I think anyone would have, that fear of what it's going to be like in the higher grade or the next grade and the people. But she was talking about, why do kids do some of the things they do or say? I said, because they're human and they're learning. And I pulled her closer to the kitchen. I said, and we were looking at a bowl of fruits, and I put a rotten one in there on purpose. And I said, pick one. And she picked a healthy one. I said, no, pick this one. And I hid where it was rotting. And she picked it up. And I said, would you like to eat that? No. And I said, it's very similar with different situations in life or people. Some people you have to let go, some situations you have to let go. It's the same as this bowl of fruit. That was, yeah, I use my imagination to talk to my kids or teach them. Maybe, yeah, maybe it's just me. I don't know.
No, I love that example. And you can go even further and say, in fact, if you leave that piece of rotten fruit in there, it's
Oh,
going to rot all the fruit around it, which
yes.
is such a thing to remember when you're talking to kids, especially middle school, high school, that who you hang out with is going to affect you. Even if you try not to, like that rotting fruit, those choices are absolutely going to affect you in some way.
Yeah, I agree.
That's why you got to pick out the strawberries that are rotten when they come home, or else the whole thing will go bad.
Yeah, yeah. And I find that for adults too. um,
So important.
yeah, earlier in my years, since I'm not old, but um, I find that I would be acting or speaking very similar to the people I was surrounding myself with. I've never sworn before, like cussing. I find that I was saying it more. And I'm like, weird. And then I knew who was using that language around me. It's a great example, especially with school, how we can get influenced so quickly.
Yeah. I mean, and without even being aware of it, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I also used to tell my kids, if your friend is standing on a chair, or if you're standing on a chair, is it easier for your friend to pull you off of the chair or for you to pull them up onto the chair with you?
Yeah.
Well, we know it's easier for them to pull you off, right? It's no different than, when your friends are making choices that aren't great. It's
Mhm.
way easier to start making choices that you wouldn't have made before.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I love
which is
that.
why who you spend time with, who gets your energy, even especially as an adult, is so important.
Yeah.
You want to be hanging out with people who you look up to, who have lives that you want to emulate, who have values that you agree with, because that's only going to help the life that you're creating.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. What an incredible conversation this was. I'm
Yeah.
so honored that we can, it's like I'm talking to a friend.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah, that's the power of our stories and humanity together. We can use it to impact others and to influence the world. Before I let you go, do you have any final thoughts or anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to talk about quickly?
I know, I think we covered so much.
Mhm.
Um, but it was such a pleasure working with you. If anyone listens to this and they're like, "Hey, I really want to meet up with me with Laura," then I'm sure my stuff will be down below. They can reach out to me, and I'm glad to meet virtually if wherever they are.
Yeah, where can they find you online? Are you on Facebook or Instagram website?
All of the above. Yeah, so my website is just Nichols Coaching, Nickels coaching.com. And then I'm on Instagram as Notes from Your Coach. So those are two great ways to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Laura. I want to leave everyone with this final quote. It's by Barbara Gittens. I don't know if I said that right, but she says, equality means more than passing laws. The struggle is really won in the hearts and the minds of the community where it really counts.
A good
That's
one.
from her. Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you, Bernadette.
You're welcome. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.